As I mentioned in the beginning of this lecture, the main thing about corporations is that they're legally independent from its owners. The company can negotiate contracts, it can sue and be sued, it can borrow money and invest it. However, shareholders are not responsible for its actions. Another important aspect of the modern corporation is separation, or what is frequently called divorce of ownership from control, which can lead to certain issues. The thing is, modern corporation is owned by shareholders. They own companies' shares. They are the true owners of organization. However, they are not actually involved in everyday decisions. They do not run the company. The company is run by the management. These are managers who actually decide on the behavior of the company. They make everyday decisions. This is what we call separation or divorce of ownership from control. Shareholders own the company, but managers control it. If you look at the organizational chart of a modern corporation, it will look like this. We have shareholders at the top, the ultimate owners of the company, and directly under them is the board of directors. Modern corporations are governed by the board of directors, which meets regularly and make key decisions on company-wide policies and its strategic direction. The board will appoint the executive directors. It will appoint the CEO of the company, chief operating officer, and the chief financial officer, which will indeed make everyday decisions on running the company. These people will control the company. Shareholders own the corporation, but chief executives control the company. The board of directors will hire, fire, set compensation levels for the company executives, will oversee and monitor their behavior and performance. Management will report to the board of directors. It's accountable to the board of directors and therefore shareholders. However, it's totally separate from them, and shareholders cannot directly observe their actions. So managers, the company executives, act as an agent for the owner. In the modern literature, the owners of the organization, shareholders, are called the principal, and executives, the management, is called the agent. That is why we have the term principal-agent problem, potential conflict between shareholders and executives. By the way, if you are interested, you might need to know that Chief Financial Officer is the top position for any finance specialist in the organization. They are responsible for general leadership of the finance function. For example, setting of goals, allocating tasks, motivation of employees, and so on. You can see here that there are two other finance-related roles in the organization, controller and treasurer, which will fulfill some other functions. For example, the treasurer will deal with numerous duties, including capital budgeting, cash management, credit management, dividend disbursement, financial analysis and planning, pensions management, insurance, risk management, tax analysis and planning, things like that. While the financial controller is responsible for data processing, general ledger, cost accounting and cost management, preparation of financial statements, preparing forecasts and budgets, internal controls, etc. So if you think of getting a paid job somewhere, you might pay attention to these specific vacancies. These are finance-related vacancies. You don't necessarily need to work as an accountant after your graduation. Right, so let's come back to the main topic of this particular lecture, the principal-agent problem. Management is an agent for the owner and should act on its behalf, however, not necessarily does so. It is supposed to act in the best interests of shareholders in theory, but in practice it can pursue some other interests. The agency problem, or the principal-agent problem, arises when managers make decisions which are not consistent with the objective of shareholders' wealth maximization. This does occur because of this separation or divorce of ownership from control, because monitoring managerial action is costly or difficult for shareholders. For example, you might be a small-scale investor, you might hold the portfolio of stocks, Let's say you've invested £10,000 in stocks of certain companies, and with your small minority holdings, you won't be able to control managers' actions. You won't be able to determine the direction of the organization. You won't have any role in the everyday decision-making process. You won't be able to sack the manager which doesn't operate in your best interests simply because you are not powerful enough. There is a separation of this ownership from control. Moreover, another problem is that the set of shareholders is diffused and fragmented. Each company can have millions of shareholders, literally, each holding 1 or 2 shares. But managers has a concentrated power in their hands. They can make decisions, while individual shareholder can't. It's costly or difficult to monitor their actions. Moreover, managers might have significantly more information about what is going on in the company compared to shareholders. There is an information asymmetry. But most importantly, there is a conflict of interests, or there might be conflict of interests between the principal, the owners of the organization, shareholders, and the agent, the manager who makes decisions. Manager can pursue their own objectives. For example, their own job security, or they can try to maximize their own bonuses, and they can achieve this by maximizing returns for this particular year. For example, the manager is 64 years old. He plans to retire next year, and in order to maximize his pension payments, he will try to invest in a particular project which is hugely risky, which will generate significant profit for the company in the short term, in this particular year. However, it will lead to devastating effect in the next couple of years, and the company will lose out in the longer term, but will benefit in the shorter term. It's an individual interest of this specific manager to pursue this project because he will personally benefit from it. He will retire next year, and he doesn't care if the company goes bankrupt as a result of his actions. So he doesn't care if shareholders will lose out. He can pursue what he wants because shareholders cannot directly influence his decisions. And this is what can happen in real life. There is a conflict of interests. Management pursues their own objectives and not act in the best interests of the principal, of the owner of the company. What are the signs of the principal-agent problem? One of the signs is that managers choose equity finance rather than debt. They will constantly issue new stock, which will lead to a dilution of holdings of existing shareholders. When there are a lot more stocks issued, the value of individual share can decline. So actual current existing shareholders can lose out when new stocks are issued. However, the managers might choose to do this to minimize the cost of borrowing, for example, and demonstrate high accounting profit in financial statements. Managers can select low-risk and short payback investment projects at the expense of the long-term profitability of the company. Or they can follow their own pet projects, which they prefer, which they like, which they enjoy doing, again, because this is what they want to do, not because this is beneficial for the shareholders in the longer term. Or their remuneration levels and the system of bonuses can be set up in such a way that they're rewarded for below average performance. They might get their bonuses and significant salary packages even if they don't perform well, even if stock prices decline or the company makes losses. Again, this can happen. These are the signs that there is a principal-agent problem within the organization, that managers do not act in the best interests of shareholders. What are the possible solutions? First of all, you can do nothing. This is what frequently happens. And if you do nothing, the managers will continue engaging in this suboptimal behavior, and shareholders will be merely satisfied rather than maximized. In many cases, managers won't be too cheeky, so they will try to do what they want. However, they will bear in mind that shareholders shouldn't be too angry with their actions, because if they will try to pursue their own interest in too obvious way, then eventually shareholders can sack them. And to avoid this, the manager will try to provide satisfactory return to shareholders, just to stay in power, just to stay in office and keep their position, keep their job and their bonuses. What the company can also do is to create incentive schemes in such a way that the management will be willing to act in the owner's best interests. In other words, you may try to reward the good behavior. You can try to link rewards to shareholder Wealth improvements. For example, you can provide share options to managers. If they achieve certain performance goals, they will be rewarded with company shares. And company shares should represent a significant proportion of their pay. And if this happens, their own interests will align with the interests of shareholders, because the higher the share price, the higher is individual wealth of this particular manager, the higher is the value of the salary or reward package which they will get. Or you can also provide some additional perquisites, performance bonuses, and so on, some other forms of performance-related pay. So basically, it's the principal's problem. The owners of the organization should think how to set up rewards for their managers, for their chief executives, in such a way that they act in the interests of shareholders. They need to consider this. And after this, they also need to set up a system for monitoring and controlling managers' behavior to encourage the pursuit of this goal of shareholders' wealth maximization. And of course, in the worst case scenario, you can simply sack the manager who is not performing. The final concept which we need to cover in this lecture is introduction to corporate governance. Corporate governance is simply the system by which corporations are managed and controlled, and it mainly focuses on promoting corporate fairness, transparency, and accountability. It studies responsibilities and obligations or constraints placed on executive and non-executive directors. Corporate governance helps to define the corporate objectives and policies, set targets and incentive payments based on achievement. So corporate governance is a system in which corporations will be managed and controlled. It can act as a way to resolve the principal-agent problem experienced by many modern organizations. In the UK, good governance is encouraged. It's a form of best practice. It's not a legal requirement to follow good governance. However, it is an expectation that companies, especially listed companies, follow this code of practice. If you are a small business, then you probably won't care about the corporate governance. However, if you want stocks to be listed at the stock exchange, then you will need to obey these rules. For example, the company should have a balance of executive and non-executive directors at the board. Non-executive directors should be independent. You cannot combine the role of the chairman of the board and the CEO. Remuneration of directors should be set through a separate independent remuneration committee, and so on. So this code of practice provides examples of how the company should run its affairs, basically. You will study this in more details in some other modules. To summarize what we've learned in this lecture, the primary financial objective of a firm and the financial manager is to maximize shareholders' wealth. This is quite similar but not the same as profit maximization or sales maximization. Now, this is the main financial objective, while profit maximization was the main economic objective. Right? We've also learned that maximizing shareholders' wealth implies maximizing share price and market cap of the company. While maximizing the benefit returned to shareholders, the needs of other stakeholders must also be considered. As a result of this attempt to balance conflicting interests of various stakeholders, some stakeholders will have their returns maximized, while others will simply have to go with what's available. Their needs will be just satisfied, but not maximized. In order to achieve these goals, sound financial management will be necessary, and financial management will involve decisions on investing, financing, and distribution of dividends. These decisions are interrelated. They depend on each other. And the final thing which we've learned is that in order to achieve the main financial goal of the company, you need to come up with a way to address the principal-agent problem. We will focus on some issues related to financial management and financial decision-making process in the next few lectures. That's it for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye-bye.